Hello, and thank you for joining another episode of the Sit Down with Suzanne podcast. I am your host, Suzanne. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the death of George Floyd. So, we're going to start with our jingle and then we're going to jump right in.
Bum, 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 positively Susan, positively Susan, bum, 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 ba da da dum, ba 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 ba, positively Susan.
All right, welcome to the show. For the past few months, we have been preoccupied. We have been quarantined. The coronavirus swept through not only this nation, it swept through the world. And we have been dealing with so many different things and so many different ways of living our lives after this pandemic. A few weeks ago, George Floyd, it seems so strange to say a few weeks ago. So much has happened since then. George Floyd was brutally murdered by a police officer in broad daylight. And it was just so shocking and brutal. And there has been such a widespread outcry and chain reaction, especially in the Black community. And as a Black woman, I was impacted to the utmost degree. When I saw it, I will be honest, I have not even finished the entire thing because to see someone's life being taken from them in that manner by someone who is wearing something that should represent, a protector of the people, and then to see the look of callous disregard on his face. When this young man was saying, I can't breathe, was just heartbreaking. And it impacted a lot of people, and especially in the African American community. And there has been protests, and mostly peaceful protests. There has been a few people that have been on the outskirts that have been doing riots. But I will say this, not everything that's reported on the news is true. It's often twisted based on who's reporting it. So I want us to look at George Floyd and why his death galvanized a movement, why his death has made so many people react in this way. And for a very long time, the African American community has suffered. We have suffered. It seems like the Black life is not as valued as any other life, and we hear stories over and over. And we have marched and we've protested. There was Trayvon Martin and Tamar Rice and Philonda Castile and Mike Brown, and there's just so many, Breonna Taylor, Sandra Bland. There's just so many names that we have done the hashtags, we've done the postings, we've called their names, and it just seemed like it was just happening over and over again. And when George Floyd's murder happened, and there was a bystander who caught it on camera, and then it was showed. I think the thing was, a lot of people were outraged and appalled, and then to see a police officer do this, and if it wasn't videotaped, if there was not so many people crying out for actions to be taken, chances are this is something that we're very used to in the African American community, that no justice would have been served and these officers would not have been charged. I will say that the latest is that the first officer was charged, and then they have charged the other officers who stood by and let it happen because they're accomplices, right? So a lot of people were also dealing with, Ahmaud Arbery. He was chased down while he was jogging by two gentlemen. One was a ex-police officer and his son, and he was jogging, and they felt they had the right to take his life. And they said that, he had gone into a construction site. They thought he was a thief, but he had gone into a construction site to look at, the house in construction. And so many people have done this. Even the owner of the house, has shown videos of other people going in. Why did these men feel that they had the right to take this young man's life? So it becomes, can a black male or anyone in the African American race feel safe jogging? It's gotten to the point that almost everything that you do as an African American, you're endangered. Being in your home, going for a jog, at the park, in your car. There's just so many instances of brutality by either the police or by racist citizens who think that they have the right to take a life. And the sad fact is that justice is often not served after something like this happens. And people were fed up. So they're dealing with being quarantined. Then Ahmaud Arbery, and then his death happened in February, and nobody heard about it until this videotape was released a few months later. And then, because of this call to action by the African American community and other allies, finally these gentlemen were charged, and it should not have happened. So we're dealing with that, and then to see it by the murder of George Floyd. So people, it broke something in people. It broke something in me. I was heartbroken. I did not know this young man, but for days after, and even to this day, I've continued to cry, and I've continued to mourn a life that was so carelessly taken away, that was so carelessly, cold-bloodedly murdered in broad daylight. And I remember having to have the conversation with my kids. Now, one of my kids is 7 and one is 13. And to have this conversation with a 7-year-old, and I will tell you that as an African American mother and raising two African American kids, and you would think that they're not as in much danger as raising African American boys, but they are, because there are some people who believe that the African American life does not matter, that Black lives do not matter. So here I am having this conversation with my child, telling her about the death of George Floyd and the circumstances surrounding it, because somebody had mentioned it. And I think it's important that you have these conversations with your kid, because they cannot grow up naive to the world and the society around them. So having this conversation, talking about this young man's life that was taken unnecessarily, talking about people hating her for the color of her skin. And I thank God for who we are as Black parents, that we are not raising them in hate. So this conversation is also tempered with showing love to others, even the ones that, hate them, because I'm a child of God also. So I don't want to raise a child with hate. And that is no way to raise a child. And it did something to me, because I was saying to myself, while I'm having this conversation with her and telling her the people who are fighting to silence her and to oppress her, she has to in turn love, I am basically telling her she has to love her oppressor. But what choice do we have? Because we cannot raise our children to hate. And, it brought to mind something, and I've used this analogy as I've been speaking to many different people in many different organizations in regards to the death of George Floyd and the systematic racism and oppression of the African American people, of Black people. And, I talked about, when you have American soldiers going to war, their job is to preserve life and protect, but they want to come home at the end of the day and they want to see their family and they want love. So ultimately, they are soldiers, but they want life. They want to preserve life for those that, doesn't have a voice, who can't stand up for themselves, and they also want to come home and live their life. When they're fighting an enemy that their reward is death, and they're fighting to die, it puts them at a disservice because they are trying, they're fighting this war that one wants to live and one wants to die. So the other side is going to put more towards it because that's his ultimate victory. So he doesn't care about his loss of life, and the American soldier is fighting for life. So he wants to come home. So that gives them, a little bit of a disadvantage. So here we have parents of racists who are raising their kids to hate someone because of the color of their skin. And then here you have the Black community. We're raising our kids. Yes, there is racism, but we have to show love. So in essence, we're raising them to love their oppressors. But like I mentioned before, what choice do you have? Because you cannot raise your child to hate. That is nowhere to live. That is nowhere to raise your child, because then ultimately you will become the very thing that you despise. You will become the very thing that you're fighting against. So all this emotion was going through my mind, and I'm crying, and I'm trying not to cry too much because I want to get the words out as I'm having this conversation with my 7-year-old daughter. Then I had the conversation with my 13-year-old daughter, and I had to also explain this to her. Now she's a teen, so she's seen this out there in various forms. She's seen it on the news, on social media, and she's seen it, when she talks to her friend. So we also had a candid conversation about it, and they don't understand why people hate so much. Why is the Black lives so hated? And it's been going on because it's not the first time I've had to have this conversation with them after each death, whether it's by, the man that took, and I won't call his name, that took Trayvon Martin's life. I won't give him that. And, the other policeman that has taken the lives of so many African American lives, and just trying to explain to them all this. I don't understand why people hate so much. I don't understand why they believe that our lives are not valuable. I don't understand just a world and a nation that is so focused on almost eradicating all things Black, all Blacks' lives. So this is not a great conversation to have with a child. It's a very tough conversation, but we will do them a disservice if we don't have this conversation with them, because then they'll go out in the world unprepared, not knowing what to expect. But like I said, it is tempered with love. It is tempered with telling them to love. It is tempered with telling them that they are worthwhile. It is tempered with telling them that they are valuable and that their life is just as precious, and they have to continue to live their life, not to live their life in fear. All right, so this conversation happened after George Floyd. And after this, there's been this uprising, and I think people were fed up, and people were saying, why this? This was just too much. And I think something broke. For years, decades. The Black community has been brutalized, and they have been beaten down and things taken from them, and systematic racism in this country has kept them from progressing and doing things that is available to other races. Now, I'm not asking for, a free ride. I'm not asking that to be given an advantage over any other race. All I'm saying is that we need to be able to have the same rights and privilege of any other race. So if you go for a job interview or anything, you will have the same opportunity. And if you're the most qualified, you're hired. And if you're not the most qualified, you're not hired. There are tons of such as Black people in this country, tons. But it is harder as a Black woman. It is harder because it's assumed that I know less than my counterparts. It's assumed that I will be less reliable. It's assumed that I am less intelligent. And, one of the things that happen to me consistently, people will say after I speak, you're so articulate. And, I'd had this conversation with a friend. I said, that's not actually a compliment to me, because it's as if you're saying that you did not expect me to be articulate. So I'm very mindful when somebody says something to me as if shockingly, and I know so many intelligent and articulate people of color. So here we are, going through so much, going through the coronavirus, dealing with Ahmaud Arbery, and then George Floyd, and the people just broke. I've been to some peaceful protest. They just broke. They could not take it anymore. And now the nation is in a crisis. The nation is in an uproar. And unfortunately, we don't have the leadership that we need to get us out of there. We need leaders that are looking to unite, that are not being divisive. And a lot of people right now are talking about the riots, and they're saying that, why are they rioting? It won't solve anything. I would like to mention a little thing called the Boston Tea Party. I am no way, shape, or form advocating for violence, but I could understand the need for my people to make a statement, to be loud, because they feel like they're not being heard. Colin Kaepernick peacefully, knelt by the flag, and a lot of people, were saying that he's disrespecting the flag. The flag is a symbol. Yes, it is a great symbol, but he was not discrediting the flag. He was kneeling for something in protest, and that is our right. There are many soldiers who agree that him kneeling down is not disrespecting the flag. So people who burn the flag, that's different, but he's kneeling down protesting police brutality, and he's been blackballed, hasn't worked since, and now they are rioting because they feel like this is the answer. So no way advocating for violence and, the destruction of property and the loss of businesses. But there's so many people upset about the riot, but they were not upset about what caused the riot. They were not upset about the death of George Floyd. They did not say anything about the death of George Floyd, but there were material things can be replaced. And I love the statement that Nordstrom had put out about material things being replaceable, and lives being irreplaceable. And that same passion that everybody has about the riot, I really want you guys to have that same passion about the death of George Floyd. If that did not impact you, and you are upset about the riot, I really think you need to really examine your motives and see if you're a part of the problem, because the system of systematic racism that has been in this country for a very, very long time, it allows others to treat the Black race as if they don't matter. And so I will ask you to examine that. And there's so many peaceful protesters. And I saw a post, and so it's not mine, so I'll give credit where credit is due. I don't know who it's for. And it says, just like how we can say, few bad police officers doesn't discredit the organization. That is absolutely true. There's a lot of good policemen. I have people in my family who are policemen. So a few bad policemen, although really think about it, having an organization like the police that is supposed to protect and serve, having a few bad people in it is not good at all. You just don't need any bad. So, but that doesn't discredit what the police stand for. It doesn't discredit the organization. And they also said that, so it's the same way having a few bad people in the protest doesn't discredit the entire movement. And I also like to point out there are people who are deliberately inciting violence in these riots because they want to distract from the message. And this is not something that is made up. This is something that you have seen different people who are not a part of the Black Lives Matters movement that are doing violent and brutal things. So they're contending with that. They're contending with, the president sending in, military. They're contending with all these things, the police tear gassing, peaceful protesters and things like that. So here are the people, they're broken, they're crying, they're saying, hear me, listen to my cries, let's fix this system. And then the very system that they're protesting against goes in and say to them, your life doesn't matter. So yes, if you're consistently told over and over again that you don't matter, that your life is not valuable, at some point it's going to impact you and you're going to break. And the catalyst was the George Floyd's murder. They just could not take it anymore. Now, a lot of people are also posted about Black Lives Matter. And a lot of people, when you post that, they take offense and they say all lives matter. So I'm going to explain this because I will tell you at the very beginning when it came out, Black Lives Matter, yeah. I didn't understand it as deeply as I did, as I do now. So when they say Black Lives Matter, it is not an indication that other lives doesn't matter. That's not what it is about. We are simply saying that Black lives matter because for hundreds of years, I should say, Black lives has not mattered, especially in this country. Black lives were taken callously and carelessly, and they were just killed, and there was no repercussions for taking a Black lives. So this is why we say Black lives matter. It's not an indication that the other lives doesn't matter. So if somebody says Black lives matter and you feel the need to point out that all lives matter, then you might be part of the problem. Let's just think about it. When you're a parent and one child is getting married, right? You celebrate that child that day. It's all about that child. Doesn't mean the other child doesn't matter. You don't go up and do a speech and say, about the child that's not getting married. Or if one child is graduating, you give the speech about the child that's graduating, not the one that's not graduating, because it's not that day. They will each have their moment. But for years in this country, Black lives has not mattered. You see it every day, just the way it's callously taken and disregarded. So this is why we are saying Black lives matter. So you don't have to say all lives matters when it says because other lives are not in danger. We're not saying Caucasian life doesn't matter. Caucasian life is one of the most highly protected life in this country. So we're not saying that it's not. We're simply saying Black lives matter, because for a very long time, and even to this day, we saw it most recently with the death of George Floyd, and there's been other murders after that Black lives didn't matter or doesn't matter. That's how it's portrayed. So this is why we're saying Black lives matter. I'm a Black woman. My life matters. My kids are Black kids. Black kids' life matter. My husband is a Black man. His life matter. I have brothers and uncles and nephews and cousins. Their life matters. And this is what I'm saying to you. Don't get offended by the riots, but not be offended by what led to it. Yet another death of a unarmed Black man. Whether he did a crime or not, we're not talking about that. That crime doesn't, the repercussions of that crime, so many people do it. It was proven that he didn't, does not equal death. So, and this is why, people are upset. So you can't be upset at the riot, but not be upset at what caused it. You just cannot. You cannot point out every time somebody says Black Lives Matters and be offended by saying all life matters, because that's not what we're saying. We're saying Black life matters because for a very long time it seems like Black life does not matter. And this is what we're saying. We want our kids to know that they matter. I don't want my kids and their kids to be raised in a society that I was raised, that my life has less value. So you don't have to remind them that all life matters. You know, the incident that happened in Central Park with the gentleman, he was bird watching, and this lady called the police. That was another catalyst, why so many people are reacting. She changed her voice. She was talking, and come to find out, this is a intelligent, highly paid woman. So she knows. So she changed her voice so you could hear the nuances in her voice when she said, I'm going to call the police and says that I am threatening you. So she changed her voice to sound like a victim, like she's fearing for her life. So if the police had came up on that scene, what happens? They shoot first and ask questions later, and then we would have found out. This guy could have been another statistic. So all I'm saying to you is don't get offended of what's happening. No, burning down property, especially people who have worked hard and, built their things, is not okay. But don't be upset at the riot if you're not upset at what caused the riot. Don't remind us, Black people, that all lives matters if you're not understanding why Black lives matter. Ask somebody Black why we say Black life matters. We're just saying, in this time, we would like Black lives to be valuable. This went longer than I thought it was going to be. And this was just in reaction to George Floyd. And there's been so many things that have changed, over the past couple of days. And I've had so many people. So I started up on this website for Spot a Guest, and so many people reached out to me that wanted to be a guest on the show. And I had such a great plan for the month of June. But I had to put that on pause because I have to talk about what's happening to me, what's happening to my community. And not only before the riots was there cause for alarm for, being Black, but as a Black woman, I will tell you, leaving my house sometimes I feel like is a death sentence. Driving in my car, and with these riots happening with the police out and the militia out, I am concerned. Am I going to make this home? A few nights ago, my husband worked late, and my daughter, the 13-year-old daughter, she came out of the room almost in tears. She's like, Mom, where's Dad? He's not home yet. I called his phone. I didn't get him. I'm concerned. I don't want anything to happen to him. That is no way to live. No way to live. So all I'm saying is to you is try to understand the causes. Try to understand the people. Let George Floyd's life not be in vain. Speak to someone. Educate yourself. Be better. Do better. Not everybody is racist. We know that. There's been allies. And in order for us to make the changes, so I thank you for everyone that's been marching from all the different races all over the world. And this man, his death touched so many. And if he only knew, right? So his death is not in vain. So have the conversations. It's going to be uncomfortable. Talk to people. And, people always say, like, I have Black friends. Talk to your Black friends. Touch base with them. Ask them how they're feeling. Share how you're feeling and have the conversation. Because we're dying, we're crying, we're heartbroken, we're hurting. And in order for us to move forward, in order for us to make changes that will dismantle the system, that will dismantle the racism that has prevailed in this country for hundreds of years, we need partnership with people that are in positions of power. I'm also going to advise you to go out and vote. Utilize your vote. Know what's happening in your community. Vote for your senators, vote for your mayors, vote for your councilmen, and vote for a president in November. Utilize your voice. And I know sometimes we think one vote doesn't matter. It does. So I'm going to encourage you to have the conversation before you dismiss the cause, before you talk about the result. Let's talk about what led up to it. Let's have deep, uncomfortable, candid, honest conversation, and let's move forward to change. I thank you for listening. I will be having a few more podcasts in regards to the Black Lives Matters movement, what we can do to move forward as a people, different institutions, organizations, including colleges. And I'm excited because I've been talking to a few people at different organizations that can implement change there. So let's utilize our voices to vote so that we can connect and put people in places and power and position that can implement changes that once and for all will create equality for all races. Thank you.